Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Side Chats. I believe that this is episode 7, right, Trev?
Your guess is as good as mine. At a certain point, I just stop with the numbers in my
I
head. Kind of
know.
like I feel that way about iPhone too. Like, what are we? We're on iPhone. Is it
Like,
15?
yeah,
When
it's
does the
something
number stop?
ridiculous.
Because I just feel like it's going to be hard to really. People are already having a hard time getting excited about it, but it's really going to be hard to get excited about like iPhone 37. Like, who cares? Like,
Yeah,
it's not as powerful as 5 and iPhone 6
exactly.
and it's kind of like franchises.
Exactly. No,
So
I was thinking the
anyway.
same thing. Well, you know what I thought was so funny is because we had Hurricane Hillary and we filmed during that weekend when the hurricane
Bravely.
happened.
So bravely.
I know. And then like we've totally been like off the rails with posting, but I think that like, we're going to get in a better habit, again, we've kind of like had our, life happen and just like figuring things out. So, and I think we'll actually, just like yeah, life's going to kind of hopefully get a little bit more chill and then the
Hmm.
holidays are going to happen, so we'll see what happens there, but whatever.
Well, that's why this is Solidarity Side Chats because it's sort of our
Mhm.
experimental like
Phase.
sandbox where yeah
It's a
we're
phase,
trying
mom.
we're trying sort of different formats sometimes and different topic like choices and
Hmm.
different schedules, and so this is all one giant experiment that we are using to sort of tool an actual full show that will launch once we feel confident that we've got the formula down. And then once the formula is down and we launch the actual show, Solidarity Side Chats, I think, and Meg can correct me if I'm wrong, but it'll continue to exist as just sort of a lax format for
Hmm.
either ourselves or other people. Sometimes we'll have guest hosts, sometimes we'll just have guests, sometimes just to sort of chill and hang out and talk about important things without having to really be so rigid about format and structure. And I think there's
Hmm.
a value to that. So, it's a little less consistent than what a traditional full like podcast and stuff like that is. And that's because it's not the full podcast. It's side chats. That's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, because I think that that kind of flexibility is really nice just as a content creator,
Hmm.
and also just like, because I know that whenever we do launch our, you know, show, when it comes into its full evolution, I guess you could say, then we'll still have this for like other content creators to get involved with and kind of pick up the torch, I guess you could say, in a
Yeah,
way.
exactly. And so,
So,
and plus the folks out there, you understand we're working people. We got lives. We're busy. We're not corporate
yeah.
media. We can't just sit in a little air conditioned studio and ramble off nonsense for 6-figure salaries. We got things we have to balance and juggle. And that's what it's like to be in independent media and in the working
Yes.
class and to try to do this. So thank you for your patience. Thank you for your understanding. You all out there are probably just as busy as we are, if not more so. And so we're all taking time for each other. And as long as we can do that, great things will happen.
Correct.
So this
Correct.
week we are talking about, we're sort of dedicating the entire length of the episode to one topic. In the past, we sort of experimented with different things of like doing 2 or 3 topics and talking about films and these sorts of things. So this week we're dedicating the entire conversation to one general topic, although there are sort of subtopics within it, which is obviously the upcoming presidential election, but more specifically, what seems to be the most interesting development as far as third party / independent candidates that we have seen in decades, actual decades, and we're going to look at some numbers. It's Biden versus Trump for now.
Hmm.
Monday, which is when this is supposed to be uploaded, RFK Jr. So by the time you watch this, RFK Jr. may have already announced that he is no longer seeking the Democratic Party nomination and is planning to pivot towards being an independent candidate.
Hmm.
Cornel West on the left side of things, even though RFK Jr. is running, supposedly as a Democrat, he's attracted more of a right-wing following and has more right-wing positions on things like vaccines. So on the left of him is Cornel West, who has had a bit of a bumpy start himself. At first, he sought the candidacy of the People's Party before realizing that was kind of a clown show, which I knew it was. So he very quickly pivoted to then seeking the nomination of the Green Party. And I don't know that ever actually even got that far. He was never like announced as the official candidate.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Green Party didn't want him, etc. So now Cornel West has pivoted and said that he is going to instead run solely as an independent. So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening, and we wanted to discuss why is this happening? Why do we have on opposite sides of the political spectrum two well-known, very well-known, and depending on who you talk to, respected people. RFK Jr. is respected by some of the crazier folks, but Cornel West was Team Bernie and had a lot of respect as an intellectual. His pedigree certainly speaks for itself. So this is, I'm sure they'll try to paint him as some kooky, wacky guy now, and he does have a bit of an eccentric personality, so that could happen. But if you look at his real record and you know anything about Cornel West, he is a serious public intellectual and has been in this sort of progressive fight for some time now and was one of Bernie's loudest sort of supporters. So why is it that this election specifically, it's actually not even really third parties that we're talking about. We're talking about purely independent candidates on both ends of the political spectrum, some pretty well-known larger names jumping into this. And what does that mean? What's about to happen? So we want to sort of go over all of the details. So before we really dive into the numbers, what the polls are saying, what RFK Jr.'s impact could be, what Cornel West is up to, etc. Meg, I am curious, have you been sort of looking at any of this so far? How are you feeling about the electoral process this round? And do you have any sort of general
process sucks.
Yeah, apart from it.
Okay, yeah. Well, I will tell you two things. Just like, it really hurts me to say this, but it's just like I really find it difficult to see any kind of third party candidate becoming president when we don't have ranked choice voting, which is super imperative for us to go and implement if we want to have a true democracy. And then secondly, I think that we need to do away with the Electoral College. I think that that's super outdated, and I think historically it's like kind of tied towards, the not the greatest era of our country. It was to kind of give the southern states more of a say or something because they couldn't count. It's not
an equal distribution of influence for sure. But there's layers of that to our government as well. The Senate, the idea that each state should get the same amount of anything when this, California has entire cities that have larger populations than entire states. It's so, for sure. That needs to be rethunk, to put it lightly.
Yeah. And it just like, it's kind of just, it's a really shitty system because it's like, how can we go and do away with these unnecessary systems that are not representative of people because they're not, at least not in the equal sense. But, how can you go and change these when the people that are in place benefit from these systems? Like when the people that we elect in there are put into these positions of power, and especially when they also benefit from the two-party system. And so, I don't know. Is it Maine or Massachusetts that got ranked choice voting?
No, I don't.
I think it was one of the two. And then I think Alaska also has it. And I don't know how they got it done, but maybe that's something we should explore in a different episode, Right. But we definitely need to go and do that. I would love to see what's going to happen over the course of this next year, though, with these different candidates. And I definitely have my own opinions on how the media is treating them. And I am also curious because I know that you're going to go and break down, the data and lists and statistics and everything. But I thought it was very interesting that Kennedy, is running as a Democrat, but then he's finding more popularity with Republicans. And I was kind of wondering specifically why that is, in comparison to like any of the other Republican candidates, or Trump, because he is kind of the leader of the GOP still.
Yeah, well, he's the leader of certainly the base of voters for the Republican Party. The Republican establishment still does not. I think they still don't like him, but they're powerless to stop him. Hate. Yeah, they're powerless to stop him, and he wins, or at least he's still a strong candidate, whether anybody wants to admit that or not. But yeah, let's get into just the idea of RFK Jr. here and what exactly this means. So he's expected to soon announce, by the time you watch this, we'll have probably already announced that he's going to become an independent candidate rather than seeking the nomination for the Democratic Party. The most recent Reuters poll conducted this past week among likely voters finds former President Donald Trump at 40%, Biden at 38%, and Kennedy at a pretty sizable 14%. Now, what is the significance of 14%? Well, according to journalists and some folks that have sort of dived into past decades of polls and data, to our knowledge, at least what people have dug through so far, there has not been an eventual third party or independent candidate that has gotten to 14% in national polls since Ross Perot in the 1996 election cycle. Now, for those of you who know anything about history of elections in the United States, you probably discussed it in history class and civics class in high school. Ross Perot was probably the most successful candidate, depending on how you measure that, of any sort of independent third-party run, and famously is considered to have really significantly altered the course of that election. Of course, he didn't win, and that's sort of the key here, but Ross Perot's independent run really threw a wrench into the normal process, and a lot of votes, a not insignificant amount, went to him that could have gone either way and changed the outcome of that election. So the fact that RFK Jr. is polling as sizable as someone like Ross Perot is why folks are talking about what this independent run could mean. Now, even though he has so far run as a Democratic candidate, his favorability ratings are much, much higher among Republican voters. And so the actual numbers of that are his favorability rating among Democrats or Democrat-leaning independents who do not like their current candidate, Biden. 31% of those folks go to RFK Jr., while it's 32% among Republicans or conservative-leaning independents who do not like Trump. So in terms of these sort of middle area people of either side who don't like their current frontrunner, it's a pretty even match. 31% of moderate Democrat independent folks who hate Biden, 31% for RFK Jr., and for the Republicans/independents who lean more right, who don't like Trump for whatever reason, 32% of them. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so, do we know why these people are leaning towards him specifically? Was that ever,
All we have are the numbers. All we have is, would you vote for him, yes or no? And so 31% of those respondents
so everyone has a reason, so we don't know why exactly.
Right. I didn't.
That's
yeah,
something
we don't
I want to get into later, because I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I think it's worth speculating. So then in a potential general election, the same poll said that Kennedy got 12% from Republicans and 9% from Democrats, which could narrowly, if that were to actually shape out, would narrowly help Biden win. Among voters who either didn't vote in 2020 or are not likely to vote this time around either, the non-voting folks, Kennedy has better net favorability ratings and trails the frontrunners by just a much narrower margin. This means that Kennedy could potentially drive up voter turnout, but then still not affect the outcome of the election at all. In other words, people who normally wouldn't vote might show up to vote for Kennedy, in which case it's kind of null and void because he's not taking away from anybody. So those are the stats. That's the rundown of RFK Jr. that I thought was pretty significant from that recent big poll. And so I want to kind of talk about what we think might happen with him announcing independent. Do you think that it's true that he could potentially help Biden? Is that an accurate sort of assessment of how people feel about RFK Jr., that it's mostly right-wing people, and that given the choice, people on the left, or at least sort of undecided voters that might lean more Democrat or left. Do we really think that those folks will still show up more for Biden, in which case RFK takes away from Trump, or is it something else? Does he actually take away, because he was running as a Democrat at first, and he is a Kennedy. So does he actually take away from Biden? What do we think would actually happen? I'm curious what you think, because you sort of talked about his campaign with, I know, people sort of in your personal life outside of the internet. You've sort of discussed him, and I've certainly seen people talk about him as well. So I'm curious, what is your sort of feel? What's the vibe about how people are talking about RFK Jr.'s campaign so far from what you've seen?
Well, I have friends that, they're in our age range, and they're not, they don't have a home in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. So they're independent or NPP. And I think that if they found out about Kennedy, if they don't already know about him, they would want to look into him and see what he's all about. And, I have family members that are older that I've talked to, and I've said, oh yeah, like Kennedy, is running, yada, 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 and kind of said, like, this is who he is. And I said, the downside that a lot of people have with him is that he's very anti-vax, and, this family member said to me, if that's like the one thing that's like the downside, like, I really don't care, because we've just got into such a ridiculous place as a society, as a country, where it's just like, we're like, I don't really care. Like, they don't really care about that, because it's just like, with Trump, how many like traumas did we go through within the 4 years? And now with Biden, it's just like, I mean, gas is $6 in California, people are struggling to go and pay their bills. Like, it's crazy. And so, like, nobody's happy with either one of them. And then on top of that, when we're talking about, like, well, why is Kennedy finding more favorability with Republicans than Democrats, but still finding favorability with both? I think that, like, something that's kind of been brought to my attention is that he is younger than Trump and Biden. And I know that a lot of people are concerned about Biden's health and mental wellness and well-being. And so that could be another reason that people kind of lean towards going with Kennedy, because he's younger than them. But I think he's still in his, like, mid to late 60s, which is kind of crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, he's 69 years old, so he's like almost 70. So, it's still like, when we're talking
it's
Biden,
young
we're talking,
compared
but we're
to
talking about a
other
decade.
candidates.
Yeah, we're talking about a decade, or like 7 years with Trump. I think, like, so it's not insignificant. There's a big difference between a 69-year-old and an 80-year-old. That's a huge, like, going from one to the other has huge implications, because the average lifespan is 70 something, So when you start getting into the 80s, we're talking about someone who has outlived the average lifespan, and a lot of stuff starts to break down realistically. Increasingly so, you're on quote unquote borrowed time or extra or bonus or whatever. And there are people who live in their 90s, and there are people who like Dianne Feinstein, who managed to be wheeled around as a corpse in Washington, D.C. And so she held on for...
That was so bad. That was traumatic. That was like it was like literally like Weekend at Bernie's, but like Weekend at D.C. Like, I was just like, it was appalling. Like, that was like, to me, that was elder abuse. And it's like a shame that nobody's going to be held responsible for like what happened.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Anyways,
that's a system. No, you're right though. It's like, so he's not a young person, but compared to what we've had to deal with, so I get that. That's like a real concern people have in general. But like, I would rather have, personally, what I don't think people really mention is, I would rather have like some senile old guy who's not going to destroy everything than somebody who's young and very with it and is able to do things, but they're evil. So I do think, like, obviously, ideally, I would like someone who's good and competent, and this current
Yeah.
system doesn't really design to do that. But if I had a choice between a senile guy who just kind of is confused and he's got a team around him and he's just sort of the puppet that goes out there versus someone who's sort of aware but wants to do bad things, I'll take the senile guy in
Well,
that
can
situation.
I ask a question? Because like this is where, like, what now? Are you saying that Kennedy is like bad or evil, or is that just like the conversations that are being discussed around him?
Well, I think objectively he's not. He's a right-wing conspiracy theorist, and vaccine
Okay.
is like the most obvious issue, but anybody that's willing, to me, it's a litmus test. It's not just about, I mean, to me,
Yes.
first of all, if you can't accept basic science, that is a
Yeah.
huge, gigantic red flag. So I don't feel if that's the only thing he's wrong on, it implies that he's wrong about a lot and that he's not living in reality. And anyone, I mean, even Trump went to his
Got
own audience
vaccinated.
and was pro-vaccine. He got booed for it, but for whatever reason, Trump being the weirdo that he is, he doesn't really always toe the line of whatever he's supposed to in terms of conservative media and talking points. Trump is a
'Cause he's a free
germaphobe.
thinker.
Yeah, he's a free thinker, but more importantly, he's a germaphobe. Like he really
Oh yeah.
is.
Oh
yeah.
my God, you're so right though,
Yeah.
because I have a cousin that used to be in the Secret Service and he was watching Trump, and he said that Trump was like a compulsive hand washer.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like that. I was like, I would compulsively wash my hands if I was around Trump. You know, like so I can understand why he would be washing his own hands all the time.
Right. Well, he's got
but
to
yeah.
wash that. He's got to wash that Stormy Daniels off of him.
Yeah. Oh,
afterwards.
yeah. Yeah. No, I feel like Stormy needs to wash herself after having to deal with him.
Yeah. So he is a germaphobe, and so I think that's why weirdly he stumbled his way into having the correct take on vaccines, is because he doesn't want to get sick. He doesn't want the virus. He really is actually quite anal about all those things. So anyway, so when we're talking about RFK Jr., we're talking about someone to the right of Trump on that issue, on the issue of medical science. And so I actually think that RFK Jr. and anyone with that sort of ideology and lack of acceptance of basic science could do a lot more damage than someone like Trump, at least on that issue. If RFK Jr. had been in charge when COVID was just getting started, would we have seen stimulus checks? Would we have shut down at all? I mean, to Trump's credit, his policy was not great. They were supposed to go much further, but Biden's was not much better. And this is going to be
Yeah.
one of the things we discuss in a moment in terms of why is Biden polling so low and why is Trump still so competitive with him, when it seemed like people came out in droves to vote in Biden because Trump was seen as this uniquely awful, evil guy by much of the country. Why is it still competitive if that's true? You know, why are so many people not seeing that? And part of it comes down to, when you look at, like, just think of the average person who's not super tuned into politics, who sent them more stimulus checks, who sent them more money.
Yes.
You know, I mean, Trump sent
Trump
more than
did.
one check, and Biden sent one check, and then it was actually less than what he promised. He said 2,000, and then he did that stupid
that
thing
was such bullshit.
where
I'm
they
sorry.
sent
That was
where they
so-
sent 1,400, and then they said, oh, that previous 600 you got from him, that
We're
counts
counting
towards.
that. Yeah.
So people don't forget that stuff. And then you have other things, which you can get into in a bit. But so, you know, Trump being the candidate that he is versus RFK Jr., part of the reason I think Trump is still a strong candidate is because he did certain things that are objectively good. Not because he didn't come up with them, and it's not like I'm giving him credit for that, but his administration, under his watch, certain good things that needed to happen. Not enough, but there were stimulus checks sent out. There was a brief, far too brief period of time where we shut down certain things, etc. According to RFK Jr., I don't think we should. He would say we shouldn't have done any of those things. So, you know, is that really an alternative anybody should be considering? No. So that's why I say he's evil and dangerous. And I think vaccine is not the only issue, but it's a litmus test for how anyone would deal with actual facts, basic facts and reality, if given the power to do so. So that's why I say that.
Okay. Yeah, because I was just curious. And I totally understand where you're coming from and everything. The thing that, like, for me, I would definitely want to look into is, like, you know, like, supposedly we have checks and balances in the country. So it's like, you know, how much damage could somebody do within that position? you know.
Well, yeah.
But that we don't need to get into the nitty gritty of that. But that's something that I would want to go and like check out and everything. Um, because even though we have these checks and balances, like I don't know how effective they really are at the end of the day. But then again, maybe because like he would be an independent, like maybe the Democrats and Republicans wouldn't want to really work with him, you know, and that could be either a bad thing or a good thing. Who knows?
Yeah, but the problem with presidency is, even if governance-wise their powers, ends up being limited or whatever.
Yeah.
One thing the president does have more than any other person in the country and more than most people in the world is
Nukes.
a gigantic what?
Nukes.
Well, yeah, there's those. There's those, and then there's the microphone. There's the visibility, the famousness, the celebrity that comes with being president. And so right now, RFK Jr. is just this weirdo sort of independent candidate that some fringe people and non-voters or independent folks are kind of just watching internet clips of. If someone like that gets elected president, now suddenly it is mainstream official opinion to not believe in vaccines, to not believe in the basic science of this matter. And so even if policy-wise he wouldn't be able to really influence the CDC as much, although I think as president he could, it's just the visibility and the volume at which being president can grant anyone opinion or set of views and so on. So I do think it would be dangerous to have someone like him. The good news is I don't really think there's any threat. Look, when you look at the polls, yes, he's polling as much as Ross Perot. And how did Ross Perot do? Ross Perot did not become president. Ross Perot did not become even close to becoming president. And whenever someone polls anything, in terms of third-party independent candidates, the actual result with the election is always substantially less. I think, for example, last time we seriously talked about any of these third-party candidates or other people did was the 2016 after the primary and Bernie got screwed by the DNC and all that stuff. A lot of people who really don't understand politics somehow went from supporting Bernie Sanders to libertarians with Gary Johnson, who, again, just policy-wise could not be more opposite, could not be stupider. But, people in anger, people do things and they go, I hate both of these.
I say something actually in response to that, because this is what I thought was so interesting, just like within my time within those circles, because I got involved in politics in 2016 and, then I got involved in my local party and everything like that in 2018 onwards. And something that was said to me is that the movement brings in all types of people. And Bernie was a populist. And so that means that like you're going to get the people that are like super on the left, like communists, socialists, whatever. You're going to get some people that are going to be like, liberal, like in the middle maybe as well. But then you're also going to get the people that are like the libertarians, that are attracted to that populist message. And so they resonated with that initially with Bernie. And then once Bernie, was out of the ring, that's when they shifted to Johnson, or they shifted to Trump, surprisingly. But that's also, I think, because that Trump was a populist as well. And both Trump and Bernie were both anti-establishment in their own ways, because they weren't a part of the parties that they were running with. So that's another way to kind of look at it and see how like things kind of break down and everything with like where these voters come from. And then where they end up going once their candidate doesn't get past the finish line, so to speak.
Well, and so the point being is, I think Gary Johnson polled at like 6% at his peak. And then what I was reading is he got 3% of the vote. I actually thought it was 2%. So it's like at least half, or at least at most half of what he polled. And he only ever polled 6%. So, that's, and I do think, with what you're saying as far as why people would switch over to that. The libertarians, I think their brand has finally been tarnished a little bit, but they were really good about pretending like they were progressive on social issues and then telling people that they wanted to lower their taxes. But libertarianism, at least the party in the United States, is literally like funded by the Koch brothers. It is Republican policy on steroids for real. It is just about austerity and destroying the federal government, minimizing it as much as possible, and privatizing everything. And so it's like, if you think the Republicans are evil, the Libertarians, if ever given the power, are just like crank it up to 12 volume. Like it's miserable, and they claim to be progressive on like legalizing drugs and stuff, but there's a difference between actually saying you're going to go legalize something and saying that we won't criminalize something, or we'll leave it up to the states. And that's the real argument, the Libertarians, is dismantling the federal government and giving the states the power to make their own decisions, which would then result in nothing at which they claim to support or agree with. So anyway, but most people don't look that far. Most people don't read into it that much. And so, right now we're just looking at how can a third party or independent candidate disrupt the normal process and impact it, and how close can they really get? I think that was the last time any sort of like Bernie people or whatever voters considered a third party candidate, and he got much further than the other option, which was at the time the Green Party, which got like 1% or something even less. Okay. So RFK Jr. polling at as high as 14% is significant, though, because we're talking about Gary Johnson was the most visible back then, and he was at like 6%. So now we're talking about more than double that. So this is a much larger run we're talking about with RFK Jr. And so that's why I do think this is a bit more interesting than the third parties we were dealing with in 2016 or even 2020. They got nowhere. I don't think anybody even seriously considered them. And so the question becomes, he's going to do it. I don't think he'll stop. What do we think the final outcome at this point, based on the information we have, is if RFK Jr. runs as an independent, if he full force does that, do you think, based on the data and everything else, do you think he's taking away from Biden if he does that? Do you think he's taking away from Trump if he does that? Do you think it's sort of neutral and he's just like getting a few weirdos? And then what do you think is going to happen if he does that? I'm curious. Or is it something completely different than what's been listed as an option? Do you think he's going to surprise people and do something not predicted by the polls? What is your just sort of a guess or prediction, if you had one at this time?
Yeah, I have ideas. I don't know if I should say them.
What do you think?
Should I? Okay. Well, one thing that I was taking into consideration is like with Perdue, you said that like it was like in 1996, so that was before social media. So that's
Right.
like one factor that we need to consider as well. But then I think I was just thinking about this. I was like, like why is it that like vote shaming's okay? But like we're like, don't kink shame, but vote shaming, like that's fine. And I thought that was so interesting. We're talking about like, is this taking votes away from somebody? And it's like, technically we wouldn't even be having this conversation if there was ranked choice voting, because if somebody's candidate didn't get past that finish line, so to speak, it would just like go to the next candidate that they preferred. Right. So like, wouldn't that be a better system? And like, it's just like, why don't we have ranked choice voting already? Like, that's crazy to me. But, I think that to me, and I'm sure to some degree you as well, like it's like a vote is earned. A candidate actually needs to earn that vote. And so like for the conversation to be worded in a way that it's like, oh yeah, is this taking votes away from Biden or Trump? Well, what if those people are just coming out to solely vote for Kennedy because they felt inspired by him, or, like they just, they feel like a part of a movement with him for whatever reason. And that's not taken away from Trump or Biden if they're going about it that way, because maybe they wouldn't have voted necessarily at all otherwise. And like kind of in a way, I mean, if we're talking about like the democratic process, we want to have voters come out and vote. We don't want them sitting at home. So is it really that bad for a third party candidate? And I know that there's going to be definitely a lot of like loyal party loyalists that will say like, oh yeah, like we only need to have Trump and we only need to have Biden. But I mean, like, just like the two-party process that we have right now is very limiting, and it's not very democratic, which is actually a value that I truly believe in. And I'm not seeing that truly being championed by either party, because at the end of the day, both of our major parties are like little corporations. It's kind of like Android versus iPhone, like they're just two main players, and that's that, But anyways, we should
So
talk about.
you think he mostly represents, then I guess what you're kind of saying is you think most of his influence or support is going to come from people who probably would not have voted for either candidate, either major party candidate. Do you think that's the sort of, which is what some of the data is saying. Some of the data is saying he might simply recruit people who normally wouldn't vote for either of them. And you think that's where probably most of his support would come from?
I think that that's probably where the bulk of it will come from, or it could come from the people that are like, maybe, because I know people that like sometimes they vote as Republican, and then the next election cycle they vote as Democrat because they don't have that party loyalty. And so like he could capture some of those people. But like I said, these are the people that don't really have a home within either party. They don't feel any kind of loyalty to either party. They don't feel at home with either one of them, whatever. And so I kind of think that like he's going to probably tap into that. And like that's like really the like silent majority, because I think it's like 80 million Americans didn't vote in 2020 or maybe 2022. And that's like about 1/3 of our voting population. So like that's a big chunk of Americans that don't feel represented. And because of that, they don't even try to go out there and vote. Like that's an issue. That's a huge issue that nobody in politics today is even talking about. Like why are people not voting? How do we fix it?
So do you think, could he recruit enough non-voters to actually win, is what you're saying? Or just like...
It depends on what his his campaign does. Like how, because if they really spoke to those 80 million people, those 80 million voters, and said, I know that you don't feel at home with either party, and I want to represent you, and I want to work with you, then he could probably get somewhere.
Ballot access?
Yeah.
What about ballot access? That's the problem, though, because it's at this point, especially at this stage in the game, you would have to go back in time and have like an extra 50 million, which I'm not sure he does, to even get on the ballot in most, like it's because who decides who gets on the ballot? Who's in charge of that?
Yeah,
it's the two parties, right? Mm-hmm. So I hear what you're saying,
yes and
but
no.
under the current process, yeah,
because I think that it's like with the FCC, that FEC, and then I know for California, our state level FEC is called the FPPC. It's like the Political Fair Practices Committee or something like that. I don't know what it's called exactly, but it's something similar. And like they're the people that will at least like kind of like check for the campaign and make sure it's compliant. I know that like people do the register of voters. That's who I had to go through to get on the ballot when I ran for something. And I don't know exactly the nitty-gritty details, but I know it's not controlled directly underneath the party, because like the party is technically like third party corporation, in a sense, right? And these are like things that are supposed to be government run, but then at the end of the day, the people that are in the government are registered to one party or another, right? And so like I think that too, there's also the Secretary of State that might have something to do with it, because I remember talking to somebody about one of the southern states, and I think that like whoever was in charge of the ballot access over there was a Democrat, and they had a competitive race with another Democrat, and so they limited ballot access so they could ensure their own win.
Right. And so this is the kind of, the system's kind of set up to have that behavior.
Yeah, and so, it's state by state. That's what it kind of seems like, to my understanding. So it's like, and that's the thing that's really effed up about our country too, because it's like, how are people supposed to understand what's going on in their different states and their different cities when every state is like has different rules, and that's a huge problem, like, because it makes it overly complicated, and that again makes people not want to go and participate in civics,
Right. So I think like if that was different, then we might be having a different conversation. But under the current rules and systems and how people can influence it, it's pretty obvious, I think, that there's no, surely by ballot access alone, there's no way for an independent candidate, especially at this stage, to be on enough ballots, to have enough of a presence to actually be a contender for the real thing. And so that's the biggest obstacle and layer of it.
Yeah.
And then the other layer of that is, let's say they even got on the ballot. What's the other big thing? How do you get visibility at the debates, and who controls those? So we're back to the two parties decide and arbitrarily change rules on a whim. They famously shut out Tulsi from the DNC debates by changing, sort of things. Not that I like Tulsi, but, so there's no path for a third party / independent candidate because of the way the electoral process is structured and because of the influence either the parties themselves or people affiliated with the major parties have on that process. So in terms of him winning it, the whole thing, I think that's out of the question. I don't think any candidate, I don't care how popular, if Bernie Sanders ran as an independent, I think he would destroy Biden's chance and hand it to Trump, but I do not think he would win. No matter how popular Bernie is, simply because of the way it's structured. Now, if it was structured equally and like fairly, I actually think Bernie could run independent and would have last time, or the 2016 election, and I think he could crush it. But under the current process, the only thing a third-party candidate can do is either get some people who aren't going to vote anyway to show up and do their little voting, or people who normally would have picked between the two and said, well, between Trump and Biden, I'm going to go with this guy. But there is, at least in their minds, there's a real third option, even though electorally speaking, it's not a real option. In their minds, it is. And they go, you know what, I like the guy. They don't really think strategically. They just think passionately, which is what a lot of voters do. Then the question becomes, if that's the case, how many of those people exist that would actually strongly be swayed by an RFK Jr. presence? And where do they come from? The people who normally would pick one of the two. I strongly believe it's quite obvious that he pulls from Republican support. So if he's pulling from Republican support, would an independent run actually sort of help Trump lose? That's the, I think that is the prevailing prediction by at least mainstream liberals. I do not think, as of right now, that's the way it would shape up because of a few key details. He's currently prepared to speak at a CPAC conference of some kind. So he's actually going to go start talking directly to Republicans. And I may be wrong about this, but I swear I read in an interview he gave recently that if offered, if considered as Trump's vice presidential candidate this time around, he would be inclined to either say yes or think about it. And now, maybe that's purely speculation, but I swear I think I read something recently where he said that. And I think, to me, based on what I'm seeing, based on his pivoting, I think if RFK Jr. were offered the vice presidential slot on Trump's ticket, he would take it in a heartbeat. I think his crew are just opportunists. They just want the visibility. They just want the money that comes with the office, etc. I don't think he really cares. I think he's purely in this for selfish reasons and bandwagon, and I don't think he's a serious guy. I think it's pure ego and selfishness. And so you have Kennedy with this name brand, the Kennedy name brand, even though he's kind of a weirdo and his voice is not, I don't know if you've heard him speak that much, but he's not a strong public speaker through no fault of his own. He has like a physical condition, but voters they have to listen to the president talk on TV and on the radio, and he just does not have a strong voice. So, but he does have the name, and he does have like this sort of, for whatever misguided reason, this sort of independent kind of anti-establishment vibe to him. And when I think of like who Trump could pick as a vice presidential candidate for that ticket, there's not really a lot of names that pop up right now. Mike Pence is out. He's actively running against Trump and no longer appeals. Ironically, Pence was brought aboard because Trump himself really didn't appeal to the evangelical base. He was not like a Christian.
Oh, and now he does.
And now it's completely,
like their savior.
Somehow he's become their savior because they don't have any real principles, and it was always about They were always Republicans first and Christians like last. So, anyway. So now it's completely flipped to where evangelicals inexplicably consider Trump to be one of them, and Mike Pence, who is an actually evangelical, is not pure anymore and is not good enough. So that just shows you how much they actually care about the religious details. So anyway, who could it be as vice president? RFK Jr. and Trump. I think you have a combination. Horrible
if they
combination.
ran together, I would say that they would probably win against Biden.
I think they have a strong chance because you've got Trump with the crazy Trump MAGA base, and then you've got RFK Jr. with kind of the independents who might be, and he's polling at 14%. So again, not enough to win anything, but is it enough to boost? Yeah. Yes, it is. That's enough people to boost, or at least have people go, I don't really like Trump that much, but I like RFK Jr., so I'm going to go vote. That could bring him in. That could bring in enough people to really sway this direction. And I think that's the most powerful impact you could have. Now, does Trump actually like the guy, and is he actually going to pick him? I don't know. There's
Trump
not real
like
strong
anyone
evidence.
Except himself.
Right.
Let's be honest.
Yeah, so there's no strong evidence that that's for sure going to happen. But I know if given the chance, RFK Jr. would do it. And I know if Trump was told by enough people behind the scenes, you do this and you win,
then he would most likely say because he wants to win.
Yeah. So this is my prediction of if RFK Jr. ends up doing anything rather than just like disappearing and flaking, which I think there's a strong chance that he just sort of fades away and people don't take him seriously. I think there's still a chance now that he's not really seeking a major party nomination. Maybe he just fades away. If he does not fade away and he has any kind of large impact on this election, I think it will end up because he joined Trump on a ticket. At least right now, that's what I'm predicting as if he does anything big, that's what it would be. So that's what I think he represents. Now, that's what we have for right now as far as the right-wing independent / third-party stuff. On the left, we have Cornel West. And we'll try to keep this brief because I know we talked a lot about RFK Jr. and stuff. So
we don't want to way into it, like more than I thought we would. But
well, because he's the big name.
Yeah.
Like he's the only other candidate polling at that level. So RFK Jr. is the name.
Yeah, no, because I definitely think that he's a contender in that sense. And I think that that's why he's worth talking about and kind of evaluating. But like you were saying, the other candidates are on the left.
Yeah, on the left, we have two names that get tossed around. Marianne Williamson, however, unfortunately, she was seeking the Democratic nomination, right? She's actually seeking the party's nomination still. Yes. But her polling has plateaued at 4%. So, one, I want to ask you why that is. And then two, the other candidate, the name that's getting thrown around the left is, of course, we mentioned Cornel West, who is not polling highly either, but is now bounced around and is saying he's just simply going to run as independent. Like he's actually going to do it and take it all the way as opposed to simply running in the primary, which Marianne, as of now, still is. Now, Meg, I know you tweeted at one point the idea that maybe Marianne and Cornel should team up and run on the same ticket and those sorts of things. So I want to ask you, one, just as a candidate on her own, why has Marianne plateaued at 4%? Do you think? Is it justified? Is it unjustified? Why is it happening? I want to start with that.
Well, I think that there's honestly a couple of reasons that go behind why Marianne is not getting as higher polls. She's not she's just like kind of plateauing, like you said. First of all, I do want to say, I think like right now what's going on is like she's not getting a lot of attention. She's not getting any kind of airtime because on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it nowadays, she's always saying like, oh yeah, like these are the polls. And whenever somebody is saying like other, they would vote for an other candidate, rather than Trump or Biden, like, oh, they might be talking about her. But they're not naming her, So it's like she's purposely being left out of the narrative, right? And then like that kind of goes back to how the media treats, third party or like other candidates. And then on top of that, though, Marianne is a woman. And not only that, but she is somebody that comes from like a very spiritual background and professional, so the problem is that like there's a lot of biases that I think people have against women leadership, and especially when like that kind of leadership has a spiritual basis or morality. And I think that that's so interesting because when you think about somebody like Nina Turner, she has actually stated that her, political principles are based on her like biblical morals, you know. And likewise, who's the candidate in Georgia? Reverend Warnick, correct? Because he's never held political office. He is a reverend, so he has a, religious or spiritual background. And yet all of the Democratic Party was standing behind him to go and get him elected in so they could take control of the Senate. And so now when we have a woman like Marianne, who, hey, she's never been elected into a position just like Warnick, and she comes from a spiritual / religious background, it's like that's actually mocked, and she's not getting any kind of support. And a lot of what she says has been twisted, and like it's very easy for the media to go and do that. What was so interesting to me is that like this is the thing that I actually love about the Zoomers, like Gen Z, is because I think it was in 2020 there was an article that came out that said like Marianne's anti-vax, or she said, basically just like pray diseases away and you'll be cured or something like that. That's essentially what the article was about. And whoever it was that did the research on this on TikTok, it was, a Zoomer. They basically were like, listen, like I found the original article that started this whole talking point. And the person that wrote this article is actually a huge Biden supporter. So obviously they had their own biases and they pushed that out, and that helped Biden in 2020, So, I mean, she's still fighting against these narratives that have actually been disproven by the younger generations, and they've brought the receipts. And I think that honestly, she's finding a lot of traction within the younger demographics. But the problem is that like how many young people are actually talking to their like, their aunts, their uncles, their parents, their grandparents about Marianne and her policies. Because if they really want to gain her some voters, they're going to have to go and do that. And I just don't know how often like people do that. I know that I talk and I don't stop about politics. It's like, my pro and my con as a human being. But yeah.
I do think that Warnock had a distinction in that he was like a political activist and had been organizing politically prior to running for elected office. And so even though he has a religious background, he did have a political background, even though it wasn't necessarily the working your way up the ladder kind of political background. Like he didn't hold like a local office or anything at the time. He was involved politically and he was part of that machine. And so I do think there's a difference between someone who's a political activist and has organized sit downs and trying to touch on mainstream issues like expanding Medicaid and these sorts of things versus a spiritual guru or just an author or I'm trying to think of who else. Like, I mean, I would say even that's different than even a businessman, although that comes with money. But I do think there's a difference. Like he was still involved politically as opposed to Marianne, who, prior to joining up with the Bernie folks and stuff, she spent most of her life just doing,
she was an author. She did serve as like a religious, or a spiritual leader and everything like that. But then I don't remember the organization off the top of my head, but she was like, she did lead like nonprofit organizations or found them and like, helped lead them and things like that. So, I mean, she does have some experience within like that field of things, but for me, I guess
the main point is she didn't make the connections that Warnock, and she doesn't really serve. There's been no path for her to sort of assist the party in some way. And so the party has no interest in her because they haven't done anything for the party and so on, whereas Warnock was actively, tying himself into that machine and accomplish something at that level. So I do think that yes, they're both religious people, but there's a distinction there. So my question for you then, I guess, is what comes next for her? Does she fade away? Is this sort of the end of Marianne Williamson? Or what do you think? What's the path from here after plateauing at 4%?
Okay, so this is my whole thing, which this is my ideal. I don't think that this is going to happen whatsoever. But here's my issue. And this goes for like everyone that's running. I think that everyone is doing an ego run. You know, I don't know. I mean, like, I know that everyone has their like, oh, this is my intention. It's because we really need this kind of like leadership in America, you know, but it's like, okay, we have Cornel West and then we have Marianne Williamson. And it's just like, you know what, you're both representing like progressives in different ways. And like somebody said, you know, they shouldn't even discuss collaborating and doing a joint ticket until we know for sure that Marianne's like out as a Democratic candidate. And then once she is, then she can join like the Green Party or whatever and run with Cornel West. And I was like, okay, you know, that's something that they want to do. That's fine and everything. But it's just like, you know, like one of my mentors said, you know, like with every action that you take, if you're a progressive, every action that you need to take into consideration, how is this benefiting the movement? Because even with me being involved in my local political party, we might have 2, 3, 4 different Democratic candidates that want to run for the same position. And then in comparison, there's only 2 Republicans that want to run. And so like basically we're guaranteeing that the Republicans have a better chance of winning because the Democrats are splitting up the vote so much because they all believe that they're the candidate that can get across the finish line. And it's just like, do you really believe that? Like, come on, like, let's come together. Like, let's really sit down, talk it out and figure out who has the strongest chance of winning and like find a place for the other 2 or 3 candidates, you know, somewhere else. And so we, you know, like, hey, we understand you want to go and represent the Democratic Party and like your people in this fashion, in this way. But we're not going to get to the finish line, you know? So it's like they need to find like a place for those kind of candidates. For me, like kind of like you were saying, what happens to Marianne at the end of the day? I don't know. That's up to Marianne. Like it's the same with Cornel West. I don't know. I don't know why he's doing it, you know, because like I don't think the chances of Marianne or Cornel West getting elected in are like likely. I just don't.
Do you think does Cornel West have a, let's say him running as an independent versus Marianne who sought the Democratic nomination, and let's just say that's all she does. Do you think Cornel West has a bigger chance to disrupt things with what he's doing, with who he is and his strategy of running as an independent? Or do you think he's going to sort of be, at the end of the day, a non-player like they both have been so far?
I kind of think that he might kind of be like a non-player. Because see, okay, like the only reason I'm familiar with Cornel West is because of Bernie Sanders. Truly.
Right.
Like,
which I think is true for almost everybody.
Yeah. And so like, you know, like that's the, like, I mean, if that's anyone that has not been involved with like the Bernie Sanders Feel the Burn, you know, campaigns, they're probably not going to know who Cornel West is, what his principles are, anything like that. So like, you know, that goes back to his campaign. Like what's their strategy for getting his name out there and like kind of just like essentially a brand, because that's what a candidate is. Like their platform and their values are their brand. And like with Marianne, like I think that she technically has more name recognition only because she ran in 2020 and she was actually on the debate stage, I believe twice, right? And so like there was a lot of people that actually did resonate with her back then. Now, how likely is it that they've heard that she's running again? I don't know, because she hasn't been getting any kind of media attention. And I definitely know that that's done on purpose because, surprise, surprise, the Democratic Party is saying, like, we support democracy. And yet the party that's actually having debates is the Republican Party, not the Democratic Party, which isn't a problem. But that's just the way the cookie crumbles with our democracy.
The Democrats calling themselves a Democratic Party is like me calling myself a tan person. It is as accurate as that. And so the name at this point almost serves as pure irony in my view. And that goes for the Republicans as well, but they're not called the Democrats. But both major candidates are refusing to do debates. And also we're finding out the process itself really isn't explicitly democratic. It's just sort of like norms. Rather than rules. It's just kind of like, well, this is the way it was done, but they don't have to, and this time they're not going to. Well, that's not really that's not really a system. That's not really for the people. But I will say, just to add my 2 cents to the Cornel West conversation.
Yes.
You're exactly right that it is a brand, that every candidate's a brand. And I want to say this to the folks out there who lean left and might be strongly considering him for some reason. I took a look at his website. I took a look at his platform. He's got a great brand. I love his logo. I love the color scheme. It's very strong. I thought the last time I felt like someone had a strong kind of like unique and decisive brand was actually Kamala during the primary. She had a different color scheme. Her logo and slogan was Kamala for the people. Unfortunately, her as a candidate did not live up to that brand, but it really had these populist elements. And after that first debate, when she said, "I was that little girl" to Biden, like we really thought she was going to cut through and make a strong presence. And but every moment since then, she's just sort of become this cackling meme. So, but in terms of brand, Cornel West has a very strong brand. You go to his website, the platform, as just looking at the platform itself, I love it. I mean, it is a socialist platform. He has things on there about nationalizing the oil industry, which is phenomenal. He's got stuff similar, but even further than what Bernie's platform was about making sure that corporate boards have a certain percentage of workers sitting on the board of the companies. Like, he has a lot of stuff, if you go to his platform, that is very socialist in nature and not like dem soc or like light social. No, like actual full-on workers having more power and more of a say, and nationalizing industry instead of privatizing industry, and so on. So purely as a person, an intellectual, a candidate, and even a brand, I think it's all great and strong. And if I have the ability to truly put any one of these people that's currently running in office, it would be him. If I had to pick between who's actually running and announced. But the thing of it is, as we briefly discussed, well, not briefly, but we discussed at the beginning of the episode, there is no path for an independent candidate to actually win. There's none. And it sucks that it's the way it is, but nothing has changed. Nothing has changed since 2016. And if anything, it's gotten harder. They're not even having debates now. Back then they had debates and they just tried to shut them out. Now they don't even have debates. And so even if he was running for the Democratic nomination, he wouldn't be able to get on a debate stage because there might not be a debate stage. And so the point of it is, does voting for him accomplish anything? Is there a path here to do something? I think the answer is no. And so I do want to say that in case anybody's watching. Obviously, you are free to make your own decision, and I strongly believe that if voting matters at all, then you should make your own decision, and no one should tell you that you can't make your own decision. That's what voting is. But voting is not really, I know we want it to be, but it is not I support this person and this is what I believe in. That's not really the function of it, at least not in the existing system. And so as much as it sucks to vote based on harm reduction and who you hate the least, in terms of its actual function, in terms of how it actually operates, that's what it is. Now, I have no love for the Democratic Party at all. I have no love for liberals in terms of political ideology. As people, as individuals, I love a lot of them, and I believe that there's room for growth, and we can incorporate them to the left as time goes on, and we educate each other and organize and build what I believe is the real next step, a modern-day civil rights movement. The kind of movement that existed when Martin Luther King Jr. walked the streets, when Malcolm X was still around, when the Black Panthers, that civil rights movement. We need a modern one. And someone like Cornel West really has the energy of that, and maybe that's what he's also trying to do. I mean, he has that sort of vibe to him, and he has that vision that they had. I don't think running for president right now, I mean, we'll see. Maybe if his independent candidacy really becomes visible for some reason, but as of right now, like you said, he's sort of toiling away in obscurity. But that's what we need. That's what I've continued to keep advocating for. We need a modern civil rights movement. We got to think beyond. I mean, Bernie tried his best, but the idea of simply recapturing the Democratic Party through the existing electoral process, through simply showing up and voting and then going home, there's a much, much broader tool shed for activism and organizing. And with the unionization efforts and everything that's happening, I do think things are shifting finally in that direction for the first time since the original civil rights movement folded.
I do want to say something really quick, because the whole thing is that I think that just with our media and everything today, it's always like the federal politics that are super sexy and people want to run for and pay attention to. And like the problem is that like when we're talking about like how we need to change our country, the change starts always at the bottom. So running for school board, running for water board, running for your city council, like I know a lot of good candidates who actually were like so aligned with like the Democratic state party bylaws or like, our values in comparison to the incumbent. But the incumbent got elected in because of just like the mechanisms that are in place, right? And because of the name recognition. And so it's like those kind of candidates, like if they're struggling to get elected in at the like state level, like what are the chances that they're going to go and get elected in at the federal level? Right. I think it was Summer Lee in Pennsylvania. She's like kind of like one of the newer members of like the squad, the progressive like sect of the Democratic Party. I think she was like a city council or a state representative before she got into the House. So it's like I think a lot of people think that they can just jump in and get that, but it's like, how active are you truly in your community before you run for these things? And not only that, like how well do you understand the endorsement process? Because there are a lot of people that think that they can just go in there, you like throw some tables, and it's like that's not the way it works. I know because I was that way in 2018. And you make more enemies than you do friends, and like at the end of the day, these are people that you still need to find some way to work with, for better or for worse. But I do want to say, when we're talking about like these essentially third party candidates in a way, these like independent candidates, especially with Cornel West, like, I mean, I know that he's making these media appearances, but I would definitely go on like as many like well-known podcasts and like radio shows as I could to go and share my platform, because the mainstream media is not going to give him the attention that he needs, but podcasters will.
He should go on Joe Rogan.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Joe Rogan, anyone that like had like, if I was in his campaign, if I was on his campaign team, I would be going and messaging every well-known podcast and saying, listen, we have a guest. We would love to be on your show, yada, yada, yada. And just kind of like, talk it out and whatever. And see, this is the other thing, is that when we're talking about like the system, this goes back to kind of what we were talking about before earlier in this episode, is that we have the electoral college, So a candidate needs to get like the 270 electoral votes to win. Like the chances of a third party candidate getting that are probably pretty unlikely in today's political landscape. But if a candidate really was strategic and focused on, maybe between 3 to 5 states, depending on what those states are and what the electoral count is for those states, they could potentially get to a spot where no candidate gets to 270. And then I think then the president would have to be picked out by the House of Representatives.
Well, and they would certainly choose Cornel West.
Yeah, right, I know. But that would definitely shake things up a little bit, Yeah. I mean, if we're wanting to really shake things up, then that's one way to do it. Like, would it get the end result that we want? Probably not, unless we elect in.
But it would really make you visible.
Yeah.
It would make people hear your voice and what you have to say and why you got to that level. So that would be interesting. I don't think there's any candidate right now that has that juice in them, but it would be interesting for that to happen one day for sure.
I remember in 2020, I forgot who said this to me, but they were saying, because see, okay, California, we think of it as a very deep blue state, but the fact of the matter is that there are a lot of red pockets, and if we get to a spot where a lot of Democratic voters in California feel like they're not being listened to, they feel disenfranchised, and they decide not to go out and vote, it would be pretty easy to have the state flip to red. So the whole thing is like that in itself would just show how ineffective the leadership is at the DNC level. But then it would also just like, I think it would shake the Democratic Party, because they would be kind of losing their crown jewel in a sense. And I mean, I would rather have like a third party, like the Green Party, because at least they're more like aligned with the Democratic Party, kind of shake things up. And like if they could get those electoral votes, but how likely is that? Probably not, because there's usually not that kind of strategy.
Right. So at the end of the day, we want to wrap up soon because we've been going for quite a while.
Yeah.
What do we think is about to happen? Is it going to be Biden versus Trump again? And if it is, what's the outcome? I'll let you go first. Is it going to be Biden versus Trump, or is something else going to happen? 2, what's the outcome? As of right now.
Yeah, I think it's going to be Biden versus Trump. And I think I'm going to be no comment for the second one, only because like I think that there's a lot of other factors to kind of consider with like between here and now, like here in November 2024, there's a lot that can happen. So
right. My current prediction is it is Biden versus Trump. I know people are sort of romanticizing that the Democrats are going to ditch Biden at the last minute or something and replace him with somebody like Gavin Newsom, who's also not great in many ways, by the way. So I'm pretty sure it's going to be Biden. I think that's wishful thinking. People did that last time with Hillary. And actually, ironically, in 2016, and TYT even, Jank covered this, there was this last minute wish for them to throw away Hillary and replace her with Biden. That was a conversation. I think that comes down to pure misogyny, whether people are willing to admit it or not.
That was weird. That would be weird for him to say that. Yeah.
His entire career. Well, I don't know, anybody who's thinking like Biden was better than Hillary, like, anyway. So there's that. It's not going to happen. So long as Biden is still standing, which who knows? I mean, that's the weird part.
Yeah.
But if anything, they I don't know, because Kamala is really bad. So I don't know. But most likely it's just going to be Biden versus Trump again. And here's the thing. Trump has not lost, based on everything I've seen, Trump has not lost support since the last time. If anything, he's gained. Biden has lost support. The only reason Biden won last time is because both candidates received a record number of votes. Trump received more votes than any candidate in U.S. history, but so did Biden. So they both broke the record together, and Biden just received that much more. So in order for Biden to win a second matchup against Trump, you would have to believe that once again he would perform that strongly. We're talking record-shattering strong. Part of what allowed that to happen was young people. Young people supported him. The Bernie people, the Warren people, etc. Not all of them, but most of them said, we got to get Trump out of office. We got to do something different. Well, how many of those people has he pissed off?
All of them.
How much support of that group has waned? How many of these young progressive people did he say, I'm going to cancel your student loan debt? Set up a stupid sort of bait and switch by pretending that the Supreme Court had the power to stop him from doing it, which he can still, through executive action, he could still seek other things, at least try. But now they're doing this little minuscule, $9 billion for 100,000 people, if you, etc. Okay. Whether he could do it or not is a moot point. He's not doing it. So you've got people who are given a false promise of, we're going to cancel your student loan debt. And now it's, oopsie, we tried, but they stopped us. What are you going to do? Well, a lot of people are saying, I don't care anymore.
Yeah.
I just don't care.
Because it's like kind of like you said it earlier. Trump gave people more money.
And
for
that's
better,
the thing.
for worse. And also, people lost Roe. We lost Roe under Biden's
We lost
watch.
Roe v. Wade. They didn't protect it. Now he'll claim that we're going to bring it back. But do you believe that?
What's going on? Yeah, what's going on with that?
Trump gave people more stimulus checks, and there are a lot of people out there who are really independent leaning. I talked to them here in Los Angeles. They're not diehard Trump supporters. They're not particularly politically brilliant people, but they're regular average people who don't really pay that much attention, who feel and believe that Trump was better for the economy. There's a real strong belief among working class folks that he gave us more money and things weren't as bad, because objectively speaking, the cost of living has only risen since that time. Now, whether that's Biden's fault or not is, again, people are going to blame the president for what life is.
Everything.
Everything.
Thanks,
that's
Obama.
what the president does. Exactly.
Yeah.
So all of these factors taken into consideration, my current prediction is that Biden loses that rematch. I just think that he needs not only every vote he got last time, but more, because Trump has gained in a lot of ways, and I think he's turning into a little bit of a martyr with this jail mugshot stuff.
Because he's gonna be. I'm Mandela. I'm like Mandela. I got arrested by my political opposition.
So,
oh my god.
Biden needs to not only get every vote he got last time, but more. And do we really think he's in that kind of shape?
Well, yeah.
Do we really think? Do we really think his approval ratings are at that level? They're not. So, it really comes down to, at the last minute, are people scared enough of Trump again to just vote for somebody that they frankly can't stand and don't like and don't think is good? I think fear goes a long way. It does at the end of the day. It won last time. People didn't like Biden last time, but they hadn't seen him as president. They hadn't seen the difference. Now they've seen the difference. They're like, a lot of people are like, he's currently building the wall.
Yeah.
So if that was your big thing, Trump is evil on immigration. He wants to build a wall, which I want to go on the record right now as saying Trump is still worse.
Yeah.
Trump is talking about blood and soil. Trump is actually, the rhetoric, moving it closer and closer to the actual fascist stuff. But by building the wall, Biden and his team think they're appealing to those independents/conservatives who want action on the border. If you want the guy that's going to build a wall, why wouldn't you just vote for the guy that's going to build the whole thing?
Yeah.
So you're not winning people over by doing the diet version of the wall. People who want the wall are going to vote for the guy who literally started the conversation about the wall. And people like us who recognize that a wall is stupid are going to look at you and go, why are you building a wall? So you lose the people that voted for you last time, and you gain nothing from the people who want the wall, because you're not, they're going to vote for the guy who's building the bigger one. So I think it's such a brutal miscalculation. I think this is a perfect, horrible storm of Biden trying to move to the right or to the center with on border stuff. I don't think it works the way they think it does. I know liberals are anti-immigrant themselves in many ways and anti-homeless. And so I know there's a little bit of right-wing nature to some of the average suburban liberal voters. Yeah. I don't think it's enough. I don't think it's enough to make up for the fact that he's losing younger progressive voters when he's building the wall, when he's not forgiving the student debt, when he is, not provided really anything substantial that they can see. I'm not saying nothing good has been done under the Biden administration, but has it been enough? Do people actually feel it? Do they actually see it? Are people going to be motivated enough to go out and vote for him again? My current prediction is no. I think, and I'm sorry if this hurts anybody's feelings, we see Trump round 2. Can anything turn that around?
Get your
yes.
green cards ready.
Can anything turn that around? Sure. There's a million things that could happen. Trump could truly somehow be disqualified through all the kinds of crazy stuff that's going on around him. Biden could, truthfully drop dead. Not that, it's. Yeah. I'm not saying it's guaranteed
old.
outcome.
Who knows? Yeah.
There's a lot that could happen.
Both drop dead. Who knows?
Right now, we're not in good shape. So that's what it is.
Our poor country.
On that note,
man,
on that note, I think to leave you with a little bit of optimism, there's more class consciousness. There's more like the unionization efforts, the auto workers, the UPS workers, the Starbucks workers. Things are changing. And so it's not going to be a president that comes and saves us at the end of the day. So
it's going to be ourselves.
Yeah, don't place all of your hope and optimism on the presidential election, because it's one tiny part of this puzzle. And so many things are changing so very quickly that now more than ever, there's actually hope that people are finally fed up enough, and the sort of stuff is hitting the fan that we're going to actually find a way out of this mess. But we purely wanted to talk about the election because, again, RFK Jr. is announcing his independent candidacy. Cornel West recently just announces his independent candidacy, and we wanted to sort of talk about where we're at, how we see that, and of course, we would love for you guys to tell us where you're at. Are you saying, screw it, I don't care, I'm voting for Cornel West? Are you saying, I'm not voting? Are you doing something else? We want to know, how are you feeling about things right now? What is your current plan of action?
Mm-hmm.
And is there anything we have failed to consider or see in this conversation? Let us know, and we will be excited to see and address that in the next video, or at least the next time we come around to this conversation. Meg, do you have anything final to say before we sign off?
I think that's the only thing that I have to say is that, like, if people have been watching and listening to this conversation, this video, and they're vibing with us, if you want to support our channel, you can go to patreon.com/solidaritymedia and become a supporter of ours. We are independent media. So we really do rely on our community to help fund, the production of this. So if you want to keep it going, definitely go and donate a couple dollars or become a patron. We'd really appreciate it. That being said, I guess that's my final say. It's been a while since we've done this, so I don't even know how to sign off anymore. But
we will see you in the next video.
Perfect.
And
thank you.
Subscribe and click the little bell thing, like
Yes.
all the creators say, so that when we do upload again, even if sometimes it's inconsistent, you will always know, you will always be alerted, and that's how you will always be able to tune in.
Perfect. No FOMO, no mole.
That's right. That's right. We'll see you next time, everybody.
Bye. Perfect. Yeah, I believe it's episode 7.